Okay, I'm so excited to have Brianna Ramos on the Arthritis Life podcast today. Welcome.
Hi, Cheryl. I'm so excited to be here as a guest on your podcast finally.
I know. I think I only virtually met you a couple years ago, but it's pandemic years, so it feels like 10 years ago.
Exactly, right? I know.
Yeah. And can you just start by letting the audience know just where you live and what is your relationship to arthritis?
Sure. I live just outside of Tampa, Florida. Actually, we just bought a house a few months ago, but I actually grew up in South Jersey. So, like Philly sports teams, Philly hospitals, Philly everything is kind of like what I grew up with. And I was diagnosed with a form of arthritis at the age of 13, and I'm 26.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you're exactly at half your life ago as well,
Yes. Yeah, it was like kind of
which
like
I
a
am
big
too.
year. Yeah, I saw your posts. I didn't even put the dots together. I always forget. But yeah, this year was my like half life, I guess.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing to wrap your mind around. So yeah, I'd love to know more about like your diagnosis story slash saga. Like, when did you start having symptoms? How did you get diagnosed? All that.
Yeah, it's always hard for me to like pinpoint it because a lot of like the symptoms I think I was experiencing early on, I didn't register that it wasn't normal. And I wasn't like telling my
Right.
parents about pain or anything like that I was experiencing because I just thought it was normal. And like the fatigue and things like that, like taking a nap every day after school and having to take that extra time really was just normal in my mind. The thing that I think the doctors started like the first red flag, I guess, for my doctors was was experiencing weight loss and had just wasn't really able to gain weight no matter what I did. Protein shakes, changing my diet, changing, a lot of things about my lifestyle. I was struggling to gain weight. And for quite some time, pediatricians kind of questioned me about having an eating disorder. And it was something that like it was hard to go through because it was like a trust thing almost, because then it like made my parents question like, oh, does she have an eating disorder? And I was like, no, I promise I don't have an eating disorder. Like that's not something I'm
Yeah.
experiencing, but I am experiencing all these other things. But the doctors couldn't really find another way to explain what I was going through at the time until there was one pediatrician at my practice who finally went ahead and ordered lab work to be done, like a full ANA panel and some other things. And a lot of markers came up in that from what I remember. I was 13, so it's kind of like a little blurry. And a lot of it was between like the doctors and my mom and then to me. But from what I remember and what my mom and I have talked about, that's what happened. And then from there, the pediatrician said, you need to go to rheumatology. And like I said, we were not far from the Philly area. So we had Children's Hospital, Philadelphia within like an hour drive. So we were pretty lucky to have great doctors really close. It took some time to get in to see a pediatric rheumatologist there, but once I did, with everything they had from labs, maybe some x-rays, I don't remember, and doing like a full body exam, and me finally like being honest and recognizing some of the symptoms I was feeling, we were able to get a diagnosis in my first rheumatology appointment, which I was super lucky to have.
Wow. And was that mixed connective tissue disease?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the first time that I was diagnosed with mixed connective tissue disease. The rheumatologist team then said it was an overlap of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which it's not called that anymore, but that's what it was called when I was diagnosed, lupus and scleroderma. So since then, the diagnosis hasn't really changed. My rheumatologist now still sees it as like an overlap of RA and lupus. It doesn't fit perfectly into either like
Mm.
bucket. But it's still like that MCTD like mixed thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, first of all, I'm so sorry you went through that experience of kind of having not having answers, you know, and I'm trying to like be better about speaking delicately about the issue of like getting I think of it as like accused, or I don't know what the better word is, of having an eating disorder, because it's not, you know, it's eating disorders are a legitimate, you know, mental illness that is one of the deadliest mental illnesses there is, truly. So it's important
Yeah.
to rule out an eating disorder if someone's losing weight. But as a patient, I'm reflecting because I recently shared my diagnosis story in more detail, and I had a few people say that they listened and it was a bit triggering for them if they'd had a history of eating disorder. So I'm kind of going on that slight tangent, but wanting to recognize that like it's hard to talk about these things, you know, and it's hard. And so I appreciate that you're bringing it up, and that I'm sorry that you had that experience. I think for me, what it brought up was the idea that if they think that I'm doing this on purpose and I'm lying about it, then they're not going to try to figure out what it really is. And that was what was so frustrating, was feeling like they weren't listening when I was like, no, I don't have any body image issues, or I don't want to lose weight. I want to gain. Did you feel similar? Am I projecting?
Oh yeah. It was definitely like frustrating because I was trying a lot of different things, and like my parents were buying, I remember like these like bottled like protein shakes to like try to get more calories in me, and I was like eating so much more than my sisters because I had two younger sisters, so I was like eating more than they were, but I just still wasn't able to gain weight, and I didn't realize that that could be like a very early like sign of lupus or some of these other autoimmune diseases. And looking back now, it makes sense that that's what was going on. But I think like being at that age, I don't know how old you were, but like being 13, like I had people around me who were really going through those sorts of things, like with an eating disorder. And it was something that like I knew I wasn't going through, but that's what they were asking me. So yeah, it was tough.
Yeah. And like, just as a piece of like patient education for anyone listening, weight loss and unintended weight loss is listed as a symptom of both rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, you know, and it's in rheumatoid arthritis, it's particularly like muscle wasting that can be the cause, like rheumatoid cachexia. For lupus, I'm not as familiar with like the process, but I know it's, of course, lupus is just never straightforward. It's unintended weight loss or unintended weight gain are going to be symptoms of lupus. So, you know, there you go. It's never going to be straightforward with the autoimmune life, but and so, you know, I see you eventually, thank goodness that one pediatrician decided to order, you know, the full lab work done, and they found those autoimmune markers. And then, so when you first got that kind of preliminary diagnosis, and I'm imagining it was hard to wrap your mind around, just because it's also like you have a mixture of this mixed connective tissue disease plus kind of JIA and lupus and scleroderma, but it's not like you have this one definitive thing. Like, how is that to wrap your head around?
Yeah. I mean, so when I was first diagnosed, a family member of mine has lupus. So I had heard of lupus before, but I didn't know a lot about it. I knew about arthritis, but I didn't know about rheumatoid arthritis. Like I knew that, like, I thought old people got arthritis in their hands, and it was really just like joint pain. But I was 13, so like I don't blame myself for not knowing any better.
No, of course.
It's like it's hard. It was definitely tough because I just didn't know like what it all meant, and that like what it was going to mean long term. And the whole thing with the mixed connective tissue disease has always been like an ongoing, I think, like thought and conversation for myself. even as someone who like volunteers for the Arthritis Foundation and has been trying to get more involved with the Lupus Foundation, there's not a lot out there for mixed connective tissue disease. I don't fall perfectly into like either category. It's a more rare disease, so there's not a lot of people out there to talk about it with. But I think like at the end of the day, I've kind of just accepted like we're all just like experiencing a lot of the same symptoms and trying to treat it in similar ways. And I'm on, similar medications as my friends with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And it's just kind of a label on these symptoms that have experienced. But I have had like an identity crisis about it before, like not being like the perfect, especially after I like made my Instagram page, That Girl with Arthritis, and my like disease started leaning more towards lupus. I was like, I'm having an identity crisis. Like, do I need to swivel here? But yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, I totally get that. And even like, me calling my, like my organization Arthritis Life, it's really more like inflammatory and autoinflammatory arthritis. And really arthritis is just like a tiny little sliver, like that just means joint inflammation, right? So you can have joint inflammation from like overdoing it on the way of exercise, or you can have it from like a systemic autoimmune condition that's affecting like every part of your body. Like, so it isn't even that specific. So I'm glad that you're bringing up this idea of like an identity crisis. I mean, I identify with it too, or even when you have a definitive label, like let's say in an imaginary world, I only had a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. It's still like, I've never met a single person who's like, I follow the textbook definition to a T, know? Nobody does. And maybe a rheumatologist listening can let me know. They're like, I had one patient once in 1994 that, but the majority of people have, maybe their rheumatoid arthritis is not fully bilateral. Like they have one side that's worse than the other, or like they're big joints and not their small joints, but it's still RA. Or with lupus, maybe they don't have the butterfly rash, or they don't have, some of the more common symptoms. So I think it can be, and when you start living your life more publicly, it can be definitely difficult when your condition changes. And we are going to talk more about like how and why you started sharing your story online, because that's so, and connecting with other people through like your volunteer efforts. But I wanted to first, I try to kind of go in order because my brain goes in so many directions. So I write down ahead of time, like a sketched out, order. A lot of times people who are newly diagnosed, they kind of like hearing from other patients, especially like, what treatments have you tried? You mentioned that you've gone on some treatments that are more typical for the inflammatory arthritis family, like juvenile idiopathic arthritis or RA, and you've tried some medications that are more typical of like lupus. Like, is there a way to condense? Like, I know it's kind of hard to condense. Can you condense your medical history for us, please?
Yeah, right. I wish. Or
maybe highlight some of the highlights that you enjoy talking about.
I mean, I feel like I've tried a little bit of everything that you could at this point. I mean, I've done the methotrexate, the Imurin. Some things have worked for me for bits of time and then not worked again. I have tried several biologics, both injections and infusions, and some for arthritis and then some for lupus. I just started on like one of the newest lupus biologics just last week. So we're kind of like seeing how that works after I was on Xeljanz for quite some time and that stopped working for me. So we're kind of trying a different route, but it's like never easy to find new medications. I'm always like, it's so hard talking about my treatment history because I'm sure that the same thing happens to you, Cheryl. I'm hesitant to share to give people hope of like, this is what worked for me, so it'll work for you. Because there's so many different paths out there and everybody's body is going to respond so differently to everything. And Even if it worked for me for like a year, it might work for you forever. So it's just like,
Right.
it's so tough to talk about that. At least, especially with how quickly science is changing and moving, even from when I was first diagnosed at 13, seeing all the new options out there now.
Mhm.
Even between moving from pediatric to adult care, because not everything's approved for peds. So like as soon as I moved to adult care, a lot more became available to me and was like on the table as an option. So
That's a really helpful insight. I sometimes forget that because I was diagnosed at age 20 with adult arthritis because I was technically an adult, right? Even though I started having symptoms a couple of years earlier, I was still technically an adult at that time too. And so in a way, I got kind of fortunate with the timing because all of the medications that were available at the time in 2003 were on the table. Whereas, yeah, if I had been 16, like you mentioned, so medications are like FDA approved for, just like with vaccines, you have certain vaccines where it's like you have to be, Shingrix, you have to be over 18 or something like that. But I want to go back to what you're saying about sharing about medications. That's definitely something where I had to learn. You mentioned like being hesitant sometimes because for me, it's like I have these both opposite fears. I don't want to give someone false hope that they'll respond the same way I did positively to one med, that they, and I also don't want to give them false scaredness, like, because like I've had some, like when I first started making videos, trying to be a little bit more on the humorous side alongside more like straightforward or inspirational or educational videos. I also did some that were like humorous because it kind of, for me, it's like if you can't cry, laugh, or sometimes, so I was like, oh yeah, that feeling when, when your first biologic like works for 6 years and then your body makes antibodies to it. And then you're like, I'm sitting here laughing while I make this, even though it's kind of dark humor. And then someone's like, oh my gosh, they comment like, I didn't know that could happen. Now I'm scared. On the one hand, it's like, well, you should acknowledge its power, right? It's good to know that could happen, so you're not blindsided if it does. But I also don't want to give people false, false fill in the blank, false hope or false scaredness or fear. Yeah, it's like easier. Sometimes I find it easier to talk about the success stories because it's like, oh, if you're scared, thinking about the check state because you think for sure you're going to be like vomiting or nauseous. Like, hey, there are examples. Like I'm one of them. There are people who don't have those side effects. But then if you're like, well, I don't get nauseous, therefore you won't get nauseous, and the person gets nauseous, then so it's like that's problematic. So it's all about, for me, like how you frame it and how you share it can make it like more or less likely that somebody will have like a good or bad experience based on your information. Sorry, that was a long ramble.
No, yeah, it was totally, it's like, I feel like it's something that's come up more and more recently. I don't know why. I don't know if it's just like new people are reaching are in our audience now. I don't know if it's happening to you too. And I always feel the worst when it's like parents of kids going through, because I do have a lot of parents who are like looking for advice and things like that. And pediatric care is so different. And a lot of the times more, I think, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're just like slower to jump into like biologics or anything like that for pediatrics, which there's pros and cons to both. I'm super glad that I got started on the medications I got started on right away. But it's like not everybody sees it that way too. So
yes, and this really comes like, I file this kind of into the conversation of like medical literacy, which is like this very kind of boring sounding term for like how like lay people, like people who are not healthcare providers or not doctors or not, nurses, can kind of understand and make decisions about their own healthcare. And it can be difficult because I know that, particularly in pediatrics, I have worked in pediatrics as an occupational therapist. I don't get approached as often because nowadays for like, pediatric rheumatology parents and stuff, I get more approached by like other fellow adult patients. But it's, most people that approach me with a medication question are like hesitant about it. They're nervous about trying medications, which is totally understandable,
Yeah.
and valid. But it's hard when people don't understand the potential. They are only looking exclusively at the risks and not the potential benefits. So you also you don't know any one person. Are they going to experience just the risk, no benefit? Are they going to experience the benefit? Like, even if 99% of patients do well on a medication, you can tell someone that, but they're never going to know if they're going to be that 1%.
Exactly.
So I think that's hard too.
Yeah.
So I've started trying to say, try to focus on the fact that you're going to cope with this no matter what. Whether this medication does or doesn't work, you're going to figure out a way to cope. I don't know if that is there something you do, or I don't know if there's do you have tips for other people in this situation who are maybe, who are, what do you say to those parents who approach you, or is it just kind of different each time depending on?
Yeah, I think it's different each time, and everybody's situation is so different depending on some kids are diagnosed and they have 2 joints affected, and then if you're talking to a systemic patient, those are 2 totally different conversations. I mean, I just try to share a brief kind of what I shared with you of what I've gone through, about I've tried a lot of different medications. I'm still taking it day by day. It's still a part of my life, but you kind of just learn to live with, you learn how to adapt to this new life, because it's it's intimidating for a parent to think about their kid's future.
Yeah, the first time I ever talked at an Arthritis Foundation event was I was asked to speak at the local camp, the summer camp for the kids. It's actually a family camp, so the whole family comes, siblings. And I remember I had all these points I wanted to make and these whole stories I was telling, but one of the moms came up to me afterwards and they're it's just great to see that you're just a person out there doing stuff and having a life and getting married. And I'm wow, I wanted to make these big lofty points, but that is all that they wanted to know. It's just that you're going to survive this, most likely. Yeah. And that's kind of humbling in some weird way too,
Yeah. I've had the same exact experience. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think I've also been on the other side of it as a camper, at one of the Arthritis Foundation camps, and seeing other young adults as my counselors who were living life, going to college and getting these cool jobs and things like that, while still figuring out their life with arthritis as a young adult. I realized that my life wasn't over, because for a long time, when I was first diagnosed, I really did I had no idea what I was going to do. I didn't know what the future was going to look like for me. So just being able to see other people out there living life with it, made such a difference.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so that transitions perfectly in my mind to how did you start sharing your story, online? Where did you first start? I actually don't know the answer to this. So
I'm excited
to hear. Did you start with a blog, or did you start in person sharing your story? How did that evolve?
It's kind of been going on for so long that it's just crazy. But when I was first diagnosed, it was the summer after. So 2014 when I was diagnosed in 2010. Wow. So 2011 that I first went to camp. And I didn't start sharing my story then, but I think it definitely sparked something in me to that I could share my story with other people, and realizing the power of connecting with others. And I kept going to camp year after year, and I had to do a project of some sorts to become a counselor in training. And you could do a fundraising project or a volunteer project. And I wanted to make a blog where I shared my what my life was with arthritis. And I was 16 or something. And that's the first time I remember sharing anything. That blog is hopefully off the internet now because it's probably not very good. But from there.
Just stop for 1 second. when you say camp, I realize I know what you're talking about. When you
Oh
say
yeah.
camp, like can you explain what is the camp you're talking about?
Yeah, I went to Camp JRA. It was in Millville, Pennsylvania. It was one of the Arthritis Foundation's like summer camps. It was a week long. Mine wasn't family camp. It was just the kids, a sleepover
Okay,
camp.
yeah.
And it was like kids with all types of arthritis, which was cool. Like there was kids there with lupus, kids there with JRA, kids there with all different things. So I went the year after I was diagnosed and like kept going as a camper and then was a counselor. And then I haven't been back in a few years since I graduated college and moved, but I'm still in touch with like the people from camp all those years ago. And like they're still some of my best friends. So yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so you became a counselor, you had your blog.
Yeah, I had a little blog, and then when I went to college, I didn't really share about it a lot at all. My mom actually picked me up after my first year and realized that none of my friends, like close friends, knew about it. I hadn't told anybody. I was in like a very low symptom, possibly medicated remission, era while I was in college. So I like didn't really see a need to tell people. But so my mom like realized and I hadn't told anybody, and I ended up telling all my friends then. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, well, and it's no, I'm asking you to like literally condense your life story. But I had a similar when I was in medicated remission. I didn't tell a lot of people because it wasn't relevant because I was doing well,
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, unless your medications had like a specific side effect or, there was some, like I had to refrigerate my injections when I was on like an injectable biologic. And so I would have to tell them for that reason, but otherwise, like, that's the beauty of remission, right? Is if you couldn't get into remission, then you're kind of living life normally, except for your appointments and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you weren't talking about it a lot in college.
I wasn't talking about it a lot in college. And I was still going back to camps like in the summertime in college. But then once I graduated, I stopped, and I like flared again, and it was a whole thing. But I didn't have a connection to anybody where I was in Tampa. I didn't know anybody in the area with arthritis. I didn't like have anybody besides my like few friends from camp that I could text or call, which is always great. But it like I just was looking for new connections. I think like I don't know. So anyway, I got connected with the Arthritis Foundation in Florida and met some people through that. And then it was like the end of 2020 or end of 2019, early 2020 that I first was like, I think I'm going to like start an Instagram account. And I was like talking to my now husband about it. And I was literally I remember I was sitting in an airport flying back from the holidays, and I like had my computer and I was like brainstorming names and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm just going to do it. But I always loved talking to other people with it. And I really think like I want to share my story as I like kind of embark on this new chapter of like, I was just moving to like adult doctors. I was just moving out on my own and doing all these things. So like, why not share what I'm going through? So that's kind of where I started. I feel like that was like, there was always a chronic illness community, but I think a lot of us really started around that same time, even though it was like I started mine pre-pandemic, which was like weird timing, but because then like everything changed so quickly. But
yeah, so you started in it's That Girl with Arthritis.
Yes. So I started That Girl with Arthritis on Instagram. I just started like sharing my story, sharing whatever I felt like sharing really. And I still kind of just do that, just trying to keep it like real, not like super like positive, uplifting. Like if I have a bad day, I'm talking about that too. But really just like a place for other people to connect and learn and what we're all trying to do,
Yeah. And did you have any reservations before sharing more publicly? Like, were you worried about anything, or were you more like optimistic?
I think I was really optimistic, to be honest. I didn't really have any reservations because I had been like sharing my story like little bits here and there throughout my life.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I really expected to like it to grow as much as it did to where it is today. And all of that. So
yeah. Well, no, I think that's a little bit of a generation thing. Like, I'm 41, and I grew up before social media. Social media actually didn't come out. Like, Mark Zuckerberg was literally making Facebook when I was a senior in college. So, and I didn't have a cell phone until after college. Like, it's hard to and that these generation gaps happen so fast,
yeah.
But yeah, for me, I was a little worried just about future employers or someone using something that I said, to discriminate against me, or just coping with the the bigger audience you get, the more sometimes unhinged comments you can get.
Yeah.
Or trolls. Has that have you had to deal with any of that? Or
I don't think I was prepared for that at all, but I've had to deal with it. I get comments or messages from people all the time, and I'm just sometimes I'll ignore them, sometimes I respond. So it's hard. I think it's tough, and it's tough to when you go on to share your life. And I don't know if you found this too, Cheryl, but sometimes I just want to take a break from I want to take a break from my doctor's appointments. I can't do that, but I want to take a break from it. So sometimes it becomes a lot sharing online all the time. So I've been mindful about taking breaks in the past from sharing, or just even not scrolling my feed as much, and consuming as much content, and more so just posting my own content, because it can be a lot to consume all of that all of the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. I don't know if you know that song, the Olivia Rodrigo song, Jealousy, Jealousy.
Yeah.
Where she starts part where she's like, I'm so sick of myself. And I'm I get that sometimes. I'm I love talking about myself, and then or talking about my story and sharing and connecting. And then all of a sudden I'm I'm sick of myself. I don't want to talk about my story again, or right now.
Yep.
So I think that that's something I'm still navigating. I just have to kind of, right now it's more I'm reactive to it rather than proactive. But I think long term it's probably more sustainable to be I know some people have built in they'll take a screen-free Sunday. Every Sunday they just totally disconnect. And I think that's probably a really healthy thing to do. Right now I just do sporadic, cleanses where I just don't use anything for a few days, and or just be mindful. Is this a good time? Am I in a good headspace for scrolling right now, or is it gonna be kind of stressful? And so I can totally identify with that. And I think it's hard because you want to circling back to that topic of you want to share the fact that you can still have a life with this condition, right? Most people can still have a life. It may not look like how they want it to look, but it can be a fulfilling existence. But then if all your days are taken up by thinking about social media content, you're this is now my life, you can forget to
and especially when the social media content is around your health condition, I think it's hard. I already am in pain most days. I don't want to be thinking about it and doing that 24/7. So it's definitely tough finding a balance, but I think we're all navigating that a little bit.
Yeah. And it helps to again, it's the double-edged sword. The cause is the cure, whatever, but connecting to other people on social media who have struggled with that at least makes you feel you're not alone,
Yep.
Okay, we're all figuring this out, and what have been some of the positives in sharing your story publicly? And you have your own podcast too, by the way.
Yeah. So it was a year after that girl with arthritis, after I started that, my friend Becca, who I actually met through one of the Arthritis Foundation events in Tampa, We met, and she's a few years older than me, but we're around the same age, and both work like, corporate jobs, and we're trying to like navigate this life as 20 something year olds with arthritis. We were both like getting married around the same time and doing all of these things. So like, it was a lot of like, it lined up perfectly for us to start our podcast. So we started our podcast in 2021, I think it was. Time is blurring. But that has been such a fun time. And we've connected with even like more people, I think, that way, just like a different audience and a different reach. I'm sure you found too. I think the biggest thing obviously has just been connecting with new people. I've learned so much, like new like coping things and different gadgets and tools that have like changed my life too, because of like what other spoonies are sharing online. It's like totally like it's so helpful. So it's, yeah, I think that answered your question.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of like social media gets a bad reputation because of some of the bad stuff that can be on it, like the trolls and the misinformation. But I always want to kind of give, equal like weight to the benefits too. So those are the same benefits for me. I think I would only just add, you mentioned coping, and like for me, it would also be like destigmatizing talking about mental health, because it's hard for me to remember this, but I did not want to talk about having anxiety, like even a few years ago. I was like, I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want people to judge me, which is like they're judging you anyway. But and it's, again, you have to be at a certain point where that's what you do want to do. I'm not saying it. There's some people who will never talk openly or publicly about their mental health struggles, and that's the right thing for them. But for me, it ended up being seeing other people share about having anxiety, like it was so powerful to me that I was like, I want to also do this and help like decrease the stigma, around like people who have like an anxiety disorder being like weaker or just like failing at thinking positive, So that's been like a huge thing for me as well. And you mentioned being a young corporate job lady on the town. I'm sure people are wondering, like it's one of those questions again, like what things do people do for work who have arthritis? Like people have asked me that before, like, oh, is OT like an arthritis friendly career? Things like that. And that was something I thought about when I chose it. But do you want to share just a little bit about what you do for work?
Sure. Yeah. So I work in marketing. I work from home for a marketing and PR agency, actually. I do like travel a little bit for work. So a few times a year, I'll meet with clients and things like that. But working from home has been the biggest saving grace for me. I don't think I would ever go back to working in an office. Personally, it's just like, it has just changed like the way I can build my day and all of that, so that, if I'm having a bad day, if I'm wake up feeling super stiff, like I can work my schedule around that too.
That's great. And I know that, just a few years ago before the pandemic, the work from home opportunities were really few and far between. So it's great that you have that. There's some flexibility.
Yeah, I've seen so many people do so many different things, like career-wise, when they have like RA or any, autoimmune conditions like this. So I mean, like, think about like what your day-to-day is going to look like when you're considering a career. Like something that I considered early on, like around the time I was diagnosed, like I wanted to be a teacher. That was something I wanted to do. And I really thought like long and hard about it. I just didn't think like that the schedule, like the days were going to work for me. My hands are so affected by my arthritis. They're like probably like my most affected joints. That like writing on a chalkboard, doing things like that. Like I really thought about all of those things, but I know so many successful people who are teachers who have RA or other things. So it's not just because I didn't think I could do that doesn't mean that you can't do that. But it's like, I would just consider like what your day-to-day is going to look like in that specific career that you're considering.
Absolutely. One of the things that I factored in, even though I had mostly been in medicated remission at the time, I had some flare-ups. I had one biologic stop working at the time to become an occupational therapist. And I was like, okay, I want a career that has real possibilities to do it part-time. And like teaching is like the perfect example of it. It's like, if you want to be a traditional classroom teacher, like K through 12, like it's practically unheard of to do it part-time. Like there's not a lot of like job. There's occasionally I get someone, they do like a job sharing where like one teacher takes like 3 days a week, other teacher takes 2 days, but it's just really not the norm. Where it's like in the rehab fields, like OT, PT, speech, like there's people that, you know, work like two Saturdays a month, or they work, 3 to 6 p.m. in the afternoons while their kids are at soccer practice. So they were, there's so many like little things I could imagine, like with your energy levels and stuff, like figuring it out, like having a flexible schedule and having part-time availability. Like for me, those are two like huge things that are helpful for chronic illness.
Yeah, that's a great
not having to be like there, like another one would be like, even if it's like a chiropractor or a massage therapist is what I meant to say, is like a career where you might have a lot of flexibility around your schedule. You could have like your own private practice and be like, okay, I work from these hours, but during those hours you have to be on and you're physically using your hands. Like there's nothing, like you can have an adaptation, but like that's like the job basically is like, and so that would be kind of virtually impossible to do very easily, with these conditions. But you're right that so much depends on how well you've responded to meds. I mean, there's people, like you said, he's the same, there's people who on the medication that worked for me for 6 years, there's people who've been on it for 14 years, 20 years. And they're doing great. And so you're like, well, they just do whatever they want. Like, so you don't have that crystal ball, but I just say like err on the side of caution. Oh my gosh. Well, and I also just want to ask a little bit more about, your involvement like in the Arthritis Foundation, because I know that's been so like important, for you, and now you're saying that you're also maybe getting involved in the Lupus Foundation. How did you get started? Like, I guess it was the camp, but
yeah, I got started with camp, and my family did our first Jingle Bell run, like 2011 or 2012, like right after I was diagnosed. So we've like always been a Jingle Bell run is like the Arthritis Foundation's kind of signature event around the holiday season. So we were always like a Jingle Bell Run family, I call us. And I'm the event chair for that here in Tampa now. So I help to plan that every year, which is super fun. But for me, it's just always been so important. Truly, without like camp and all of the things early on from the foundation, like networking things and connect groups, and even for my parents, things that they got to experience, like it's just like I can't imagine where I would be at if I hadn't like made those connections early on and realized that, like I said, like my life isn't over because of my arthritis. That was all because of like those things that I experienced early on through the foundation. So it's just always been so important to me to give back to them, volunteer with them like when I can, just to connect with other, kids going through the same thing and hopefully get the same kind of message across.
Yeah. And I was not, I didn't have juvenile arthritis, so I didn't go to the camp as a kid, but I found it so meaningful to volunteer at our local, like it's called the Catfish Camp for kids, families of kids with arthritis. And if you go, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, but it's just arthritis.org/events/JA-camps. If you want to just plug that in right now, you can see, I mean, there were unfortunately some budget cuts that have like reduced, like there were more camps that used to be there like 5 years ago or so, but luckily because these camps are so important to so many people, they still do have so many, and they are all like, at least the ones I've been involved with, they're run partly by staff and partly by volunteers, so that's a great way to give back, like you said, and become part of a community that's like a little more in person too. Like, I'm the biggest fan of online connections. Like, I obviously run, the Room to Thrive, like online support groups and everything, but it is really nice to know someone locally, like someone you could get lunch with, or like, or share like, hey, who's a good rheumatologist? Like, my kid's transitioning from pediatric to adult, like, who's a good rheumatologist in your area? It's nice to have that connection. But yeah, there's ones in, California, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota. I think the NN is Minnesota, right? Yeah. Utah, Washington. And then there's also a national JA camp via Zoom. I think just this year, was it only Zoom this year?
I'm not sure about camp. I was at Family Summit, which was in Georgia this past year. So it's kind of like more conference style, I guess. It's like same like purpose, I would say, is camp. I call it camp in a hotel. Because it's all the kids still get to meet. And
I went to the one in Keystone, Colorado in 2014. I think that was the same thing, where it was kids and families, but it was like a lot of like educational sessions.
Yes.
And then, but sorry, I didn't mean to jump.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah, no, I've been to Summit, like the conference the last 2 years, and it's great. I think it's like one of those things like I wish my family had gone to, because I went to camp, but it wasn't family camp. So I think Summit is really cool for parents, siblings. There's so many siblings at Summit who are like surprisingly like so active in sessions and things like that, and looking to connect with other siblings and like talk about their experience with it too. So it's definitely like a cool experience if you have the chance.
Yeah, I found that with the Washington State camp. I guess it's one of the only ones that is the full family. And it's only 2 nights, so it's a smaller camp than like a full residential, like week-long camp. But I really, the siblings were the ones that almost like seemed to learn the most. They're like, wow, I really understand, what my sibling goes through now. Is there anything else before we move to the, sadly, this has gone by so fast, but before I move to the rapid fire questions, is there anything else you wanted to say about sharing your story or volunteering or anything else?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it can be really intimidating getting started, connecting with other people and sharing your story. And I've learned that like I was really open to it because like my parents really like not pushed me to like meet other people and talk about it more, but they really encouraged that. So I was like really comfortable with it, but I've met so many people who are more hesitant to do so, which is totally fine too. Like, I just want to say it's okay to like take baby steps into it and do what you're comfortable with at first. When it comes to like going to support groups or connecting with people online or anything like that, whatever you're ready for is totally okay.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's so important to acknowledge. But there are definitely certain people, like, I always joke about myself that like if the teacher was like, does anyone want to do show and tell today? Like, I was always the first kid to raise my hand. Like, I want to show and tell. Like, some people, that's their personality, and other people it definitely takes, the people who don't like public speaking, people who don't like sharing about themselves. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And it also needs to be the right thing for you at the right time. So yeah, it's certainly not something that everyone should do. It's just that, it's something you can like weigh the pros and cons of doing. And one kind of intermediary step I see people do sometimes is making an anonymous account. So you can share, maybe without sharing your face, without sharing your name, you could at least connect with people that way, which, can be nice. And you can make comments and participate. So you're making connections, but you're just not sharing as much about yourself.
Yeah, that's a great first step.
Yeah. Okay, so these are rapid fire questions, but they're all ones that we could also spend like hours talking about. But what are some of the, words of wisdom that you have for somebody who might have just gotten diagnosed with either JIA, adult rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, mixed connective tissue disease? What are What's something that you
Um,
find helpful?
I feel like it's really important early on to find a doctor. It doesn't need to be like your primary doctor or your rheumatologist, but a doctor that you're comfortable having open conversations with and asking questions to. It can be so dangerous early on to like go down the Google rabbit hole. Like I literally remember Googling
Yeah.
like life expectancy of like this person of like mixed connective tissue disease, like the first time, like when I right after I was diagnosed. So it's just
Yeah.
important to find, I think, medical professionals that you're comfortable asking questions with and someone who like you can have those conversations with. Like I have my rheumatologist now. Like if something comes up, I know I can message her on our portal and she'll get back to me. Um,
Mhm.
and right away, and I don't have to go down the Google rabbit hole. Um, so that's
Right.
something I think about for newly diagnosed patients because there's so much out there on the social media, on internet, everything now.
Oh, it's so important. Yeah, to have, I think to just have some context around it, like what you're looking at, because you don't know what you don't know. Like, for example, with life expectancy, there are like peer reviewed research articles on rheumatoid arthritis that are about, the life expectancy historically of someone with rheumatoid arthritis is less, like over 5 years less, usually like around 7 years less. How, however, the context that a doctor would provide you with is that the the people who are diagnosed in the current era of biologics that are putting more and more people into remission than ever before, like people like me who were diagnosed in 2003 at age 20, like I haven't died yet, so we don't have the data. Like we don't have the data on the current life expectancy, right? We
Yeah.
don't, because it's a very long. We're talking like decades that we won't know until then. But theoretically, if the disease severity correlates, which you would expect, to the mortality risk, aka like life expectancy reduction, then you would say, well, if the disease is better controlled, then you have a less risk of dying early. So,
Yeah.
but you don't know that if you're just on Google and you just those words imprint on your brain. I'm going to die 7 years earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah, it can be scary. So yeah, bringing up, if you see something that scares you online, to bringing up to a doctor, and yeah, having that open relationship is so important. Earlier you mentioned one of my love languages, which is arthritis gadget, the arthritis
Yes.
tools. Do you have any favorite arthritis gadget or tools in your toolbox?
Oh, I feel like I have so many that I don't even like realize that it's an arthritis
I
gadget anymore. Even like my husband uses some of them because he's just like, we always say like I'll be like, babe, this isn't arthritis friendly. Like this is, I can't even open this. He's like, that's not even human friendly. Like I can't even open this and I'll have arthritis.
Yeah, mine will
But
too. My husband will it too.
yeah, we're so it's so funny. But I think like the probably my most used things are my heating pads, my heated blankets, and I have one that I love that actually plugs into my car, which I don't need a lot here in Florida, but when we do like road trips, because we have family up north, it plugs into like the like
Oh,
carport, which is super cool and very convenient.
oh, that's awesome. Oh, that's really good to know about. Yeah, my favorite heating thing is the for the winter months, the heated gloves and heated shirt,
Yeah.
and heated socks. Because I also have Raynaud's, so I'll lose circulation in my fingers and toes, and just those help a lot. But yeah, I guess you don't need those in Florida, probably.
Yeah.
When you go back to Pennsylvania. This is totally just because I love talking about like pop culture and like what people are reading and watching. Do you have a favorite like book or movie or show that you watched recently?
So I
Or
just
maybe
finished.
concert you went to?
Yeah, I was gonna say I have to talk about Taylor Swift, but um the
Yes.
book, so I just finished like The Summer I Turned Pretty because they're on Amazon Prime right now. So, and I just like any sort of like rom-com, like light read like that I love. I think I started like reading for enjoyment again last year. And not just like for
Yay.
school or like self-help books. And it's like it's just been so fun. But obviously Taylor Swift has got me through all of the times with her music. So um
Yeah.
it's like
How
so
long
funny to
ago was
think
it that you
about.
went?
Sorry, what were you saying?
How long ago was it that you saw her Eras tour?
So I saw her in March in Vegas and then April in Tampa. So it's been
Oh my
so
God.
long.
Oh, and she's going to Miami now next year.
I know. I have to keep my eye out for tickets. But
Oh my
yeah,
God.
truly though, Taylor Swift has like been there with me. I remember listening to her like my first infusions ever, like in the hospital and things like that. Like she's been there with
Oh.
me through the whole thing. And I was at Red Tour and I was at Reputation. And then the two Eras tours. So I feel like I'm a pretty OG fan.
You are an OG. I had tickets to Red, but then my friends got married the same day, and I was like, darn it, I can't do their wedding. Like, and then we saw 1989 and Reputation. But yeah, I wasn't like a diehard fan in the really early eras. I liked her voice and everything, but once I got into like Reputation 1989, I was like, oh, I'm like a big fan now.
Yeah,
and yeah,
totally.
I actually want to do we should do a whole episode on maybe a crossover episode for your podcast too. No pressure, but on like how we relate to like different Taylor Swift lyrics and how.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But all of them, that would take like 5 hours.
I know. I keep seeing ones of yours that you are posting on Instagram, and some of them I haven't even thought of that you've posted, but so many of them can relate back.
They're rich texts. Yeah, for sure. Oh, so fun. Totally different note, or actually maybe it's a lyric. Do you have a favorite like mantra or inspirational saying that like you go to when things are hard or things are rough?
And I guess it's pretty like cheesy, but I like get very overwhelmed when I have like a lot going on, and I'll look at like a month and be like, how am I going to get through this? So really I always tell myself one day at a time. If I can just make it through.
That's not cheesy. That's like helpful.
The one day at a time thing is just like, if I could plaster that on like every wall in my house, I think I would be okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, the one that I say a lot is like, I can do hard things because it like acknowledges and validates that it's hard, but like I also can do them, by like one day at a time, because it's so true. Like if you get overwhelmed when you start thinking about like everything, so you just say, okay, get to the next moment. And like, did you ever watch The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt?
Oh no, I haven't watched that.
Oh, okay. There's a part in the very beginning where she's like, you could do anything for 10 seconds. Like she's like,
yep,
pulling this wheel. She says, you can do anything for 10 seconds. Also on romantic comedy like books, if you haven't read Red, White, and Royal Blue, that's a really good one too.
Oh, okay. I think that's actually on my list because I like rent them from the library. I think it's on there right now.
I love it. I've read it twice. It's really, really good. Okay, this is kind of similar, but what's something that's bringing you joy right now? Like a dog
yeah, we have two dogs. That's why my head first went. We have Jojo is our mini golden doodle, and then we have Daisy is our golden retriever, and we have a cat, Stella. I can't forget her, but my girls bring me lots of joy and lots of cuddles.
Oh, same. I'm looking at my little sleuth ball right now, Teddy, and I have Eva the cat. She's very, very sweet too. She snuggled me a lot this weekend. And last one, what does it mean to you to live a good life and thrive with rheumatic disease?
Okay, this is one I didn't prepare for, so now I'm gonna have to think for a second.
What is the meaning of life?
No, let me think. It's like what I was saying earlier, just like learning to like that you can do, a lot of the things that you've dreamed about doing. You just have to learn and accept that you're going to have to adapt them a little bit along the way. But I feel like I live a pretty full life, like a lot of my friends without rheumatic disease, but even with my rheumatic disease. So I just, you have to find a balance of like, your disease, your medications, your treatments, and then your symptoms too, and like finding a balance that works for you, because you might not be able to get the perfect mix where you're, you know, pain-free with the perfect medication that has no side effects and all of that. And I think you have to learn to accept that too. And like just find a balance that works. That was a little bit jibber jabby, but that's what I'm going with.
No, you used two of my favorite words, one that I reluctantly came to, which is acceptance, and two, which I liked from the beginning, which is adapting. So those are like keys. Like I know when I talked to Stephanie Remsen, now it's like 2 years ago, I talked to her, the rheumatoid arthritis coach. She's a nurse who's been living with RA for a while. She also, like, we talked about how like adapting is a superpower, like knowing how to adapt. Because I think, sorry, you're just like, I'm on my soapbox now. But yeah, like adapting to what life is, not the life that you thought you're going to have maybe when you were, you know, before you were diagnosed, but this is the life that you have. So, you know, can you, like you said, accept it and adapt to it and lean into it rather than fighting it? It's going to be a lot easier battle for you than if you try to say, no, I got to like keep trying to find like the perfect thing. Like,
yeah, you have to like work
like fighting, you know?
Yeah, you have to work alongside your disease almost. Like I use the term warrior a lot. And it's like that has connotation of like fighting against it. But I feel like it's just like it's just like anything else. Like you're gonna learn to live with it. And kind of keep living your life alongside your disease. You have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of, I mean, this is what social media opens you up to, right? Is the fact that you can use language that like resonates with you. It doesn't resonate with someone else. Like it's weird because it's like, I do resonate with the idea of being a warrior because I'm like, it does take a lot of effort to live a good life with this, but I don't conceptualize myself as fighting against my own body. I more think of it as like, as a former kind of athlete who I used to kind of have to just, you get that point and like you're 3/4 of the way through the mile and you're like, I've got to keep going. Like I just want to stop, but I've got like getting that little gumption to be like, okay, I want to keep fighting, you know, and not give up. That's kind of the part that I like about the word warrior. But,
agreed.
But yeah. I love that answer. I know it's hard. I always am like putting like 20 qualifiers on that because I just know it's a really hard answer, but that's like, I think that's kind of like the central question of all of my work is like, how can we do this? Like, how can we thrive and, you know, and live like fully embrace like our reality, you know, with rheumatic disease. So I appreciate your answer.
Yeah.
And I know we mentioned that you are that girl with arthritis on Instagram. Can you share I'm just looking it up as we talk, but is there any periods in it or anything, or is it just?
It's just at that girl with arthritis. And then Becca and I's podcast page is at those girls with arthritis as well. But it's all linked on my page.
I know it's so cool. I love it. I did not know that you started sharing your story so early. I was like, wait, but I know at 13, you're like, oh, I started sharing my story when I was 14. I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Yeah, that's so cool. And I think you should try to find your old blog just for yourself, so you can.
Yeah, right.
You know, funny is, I had a blog and I found it a long time ago on this old platform called blogspot.com. And what's funny is and this was when I was in full remission, and it was like, I didn't even mention arthritis in it. It's interesting. Yeah, like what you're saying with your college, for me, it was like the years after college, my last year of college. And then I thought about it a lot my last year of college because I was adjusting to like taking meds and everything. But I started the blog after college, and it was just like, I'm putting dancing and I'm working and I'm, you know, or maybe I just didn't share publicly. I wish I could remember better. But anyway, so hopefully everyone will follow you and listen to your podcast, Those Girls with Arthritis, as well. And thank you so much for taking the time. I know that both you and I like sharing our stories, but I always recognize that it takes, you know, some emotional labor and energy to share your story. So thank you.
Oh yeah, of course. Thank you.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll talk to you later, maybe about Taylor Swift. But for now, we'll say bye-bye.
Bye.